The headquarters of ABC News stood like a steel beast at 47 West 66th Street, a monolith of glass and power in the heart of Manhattan. It wasn't the tallest nor the most extravagant building in the city, but it didn't need to be power, didn't have to scream it, only had to exist. And here, behind these walls, narratives were crafted. Reputations were made and unmade, and public opinion was carefully sculpted with the precision of a master artist. The 12th floor overlooked Central Park, its green expanse sprawling in the distance, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos inside the newsroom, hummed with energy, a constant flow of information, angles, and strategies, somewhere beyond those glass walls. America believed in the sanctity of journalism, in the idea that the people who occupied these offices were seekers of truth, but inside the reality was much simpler. Truth was irrelevant. What mattered was control. For 25 years. The View had been more than just a talk show. It had been a fortress, a cultural weapon wielded with precision by those who understood the true nature of influence. It was a place where opinions were shaped, where dissent was either drowned out or turned into spectacle. Politicians, celebrities, activists, anyone foolish enough to step onto its stage without the right allegiances had learned this the hard way, and no one understood this game better than Joy Behar. She had been here since the beginning. She had seen co-hosts come and go, but she had remained a constant force, a seasoned warrior in the trenches of daytime television. She didn't just debate. She dominated. She knew the tricks, the rhythms, the art of interruption. She knew how to cut off an opponent before they landed their point, how to shift the conversation mid-sentence, how to make an accusation and move on before the target had a chance to defend themselves. It wasn't about the facts. It was about winning in a conference room just off the main studio. A meeting was already underway. There are moments in television history when a show doesn't just air, it detonates, where something happens so scripted, so calculated that it fools millions into thinking they're watching the truth unfold in real time. But the real truth that lies just outside the camera's frame, hidden behind production notes, pre-approved narratives, and a carefully crafted illusion designed to keep the audience obediently nodding along. And today was one of those moments. The studio gleamed under a key. 1,000 watts of artificial brilliance, polished to perfection. Every camera angle, choreographed, every light, positioned to illuminate just the right amount of self-importance. The View, America's self-proclaimed temple of enlightened discourse, was about to do what it did best: turn a nationally televised talk show into a political hit job. The audience sat in obedient silence, waiting for the show to begin, unaware that what they were about to witness was less of a discussion and more of a public execution, not a debate, not even a thinly veiled smear piece, but a full-scale demolition job, perfectly timed and strategically launched against a single target. And who was today's victim? A woman who had done something truly unforgivable. In their eyes, dared to exist in conservative politics while being young, competent, and worst of all, undeniably effective. Karoline Leavitt at the center of the stage, Joy Behar, armed with the smugness of someone who hadn't encountered a challenge in decades, leaned in toward the camera. Her signature smirk locked in place. She didn't need a teleprompter. The script was practically muscle memory by now. This girl, Karoline Leavitt, actually thinks she's qualified to be Donald Trump's press secretary. Really, a few chuckles rippled through the audience. Not organic laughter, but the kind that came from people trained to respond on cue, conditioned by years of digesting the same approved opinions. Next to her, Whoopi Goldberg settled into her chair. A practice gesture, the kind that signaled she was about to drop what she no doubt considered a truth bomb. She adjusted her glasses slightly, playing the part of the wise matriarch, the omniscient oracle of daytime television. Oh, come on, let's be real. It's obviously because of her looks. Does anyone actually believe she has the intelligence for this job? The A erupted, some in laughter, some in the kind of gas that daytime television thrives on, the faux shock that fuels viral clips and generates engagement. What none of them knew, what no one on that brightly lit stage had even considered, was that outside of their carefully controlled studio, far from the safety of their polished teleprompters and predictably sympathetic media circles, storm was brewing somewhere beyond the glow of their curated little world. Karoline Leavitt was watching, silent, calculating, and soon every single person in that room would learn a very painful lesson: that there is a fine line between controlling the narrative and losing control entirely. The laughter had barely begun to fade before the next strike landed. The timing was impeccable, too. Impeccable to be anything but rehearsed. Sunny H-Tin leaned in, a gleam of performative empathy in her eyes, the kind that masked a blade beneath a velvet sheath. Honestly, she sighed, as if burdened by the sheer responsibility of educating the uninformed, I just want this girl to take a little more time to actually learn about real politics. She seems so naive. The words dripped with condescension, landing not as advice, but as a declaration, a carefully packaged insult disguises concern. The implication was clear. She doesn't belong here. She hasn't earned it. She should sit down, take notes, and let the grown-ups talk. The air, already tense with manipulation, thickened further. Joy Behar, sensing the perfect opening, wasted no time. She sat back, folding her arms in a way that suggested she was about to deliver something profound, something undeniable, and then, with a dramatic pause that could have made a Broadway director weep with pride, she spoke. Oh, and let's not forget, she mused, her tone laced with well-practiced amusement. This is the same girl who once declared there would be no wokeness in Trump's administration. She let the sentence settle, let it breathe. Let the audience catch up before delivering the carefully sharpened dagger. Karoline, sweetheart, if it weren't for wokeness, you wouldn't even have this job. The explosion was immediate. Laughter, high-pitched and perfectly timed, filled the studio. Like an incoming tide crashing over the set in predictable, rehearsed waves, it was the kind of moment designed to go viral, to be clipped and shared to reinforce the narrative. But beneath the bright lights and the smirking faces, there was something else, something none of them noticed. They were pushing too hard. They were too comfortable, too assured of their control over the story, and somewhere beyond the confines of their perfectly curated performance, beyond the safety of their insulated echo chamber, a storm was gathering, silent and waiting, ready to sweep through everything they had so carefully built. The camera locked onto Whoopi Goldberg, her expression shifting into something manufactured for impact, a deliberate performance of solemnity, as if what she was about to say would echo through the halls of history. She waited, let the moment simmer, let the tension coil tight enough that the audience would hang on her every word, and then, with the weight of false wisdom, she dropped it. The truth is, she's only here for one reason, because Donald Trump thinks she's a 10. It landed like a well-placed shot, sharp, vicious, and designed to kill. The response was immediate. A few gasps followed by nervous chuckles. Some of the audience members shifted in their seats, sensing that something about this moment wasn't just entertainment, it was a line crossed, but in the control room. The producers weren't worried, they were thrilled. This was the clip, the viral moment, the one that would be replayed across every network, plastered across social media, fueling headlines designed to reinforce the narrative. Karoline Leavitt wasn't a qualified professional. She wasn't a capable leader. She was just a number. Whoopi leaned back, satisfied. Joy shot her a smirk, a silent exchange that said that should do it. But what none of them realized, what not a single person on that stage had considered, was how quickly things spiral when you get too comfortable holding the knife. Because outside their echo chamber, far beyond the carefully curated responses of their audience, something was happening. It started small, a single tweet. Then another, screens lit up as clips of the moment spread like wildfire. The words weren't just replayed, they were dissected, scrutinized, weaponized against the very people who spoke. Them exposed the view sexism disguised as feminism. Double standards. The irony burned. The show that spent years lecturing America about respecting women had just stripped one down to nothing more than an accessory in a man's world, and now they were the ones about to be judged. The words had barely settled before the storm erupted, not on the stage of The View, but across every major news outlet that had been waiting, watching, preparing. It happened too fast, too seamlessly to be organic. As if somewhere in the depths of newsroom offices, an unseen hand had already set the gears in motion, ensuring that the second Karoline Leavitt's name left Whoopi Goldberg's lips, the narrative would be locked in place, and right on cue, the headlines. Flooded in CNN, Karoline Leavitt exposed no experience, just looks. MSNBC wokeness gave women a chance, but this one didn't get the memo. The Guardian, a conservative young and handpicked by Trump for her appearance. Karoline Leavitt is a dangerous symbol. The attack was surgical. Not an argument, not a debate. A verdict. The same talking points copy-pasted, repackaged with slight variations, but delivering one unmistakable message. Karoline Leavitt wasn't a threat because of incompetence. She was a threat because she existed in the wrong political camp. And yet, beneath the polished veneer of certainty, something felt off. The sheer speed of it, the way these articles seemed to materialize. In unison, as if drafted before the cameras had even started rolling, as if someone somewhere had known exactly what would happen before it even did. Coincidence, unlikely a coordinated effort. That was the real question, because if this wasn't just The View, if this was bigger, if there were more hands at play, more voices in the dark, shaping public perception, long before the public even had a chance to think, then Karoline wasn't just dealing with a hit piece, she was up against something far more dangerous, and if they thought she wouldn't notice, they were about to regret that mistake. Thousands of miles from the bright studio lights of The View inside the strategic nerve center of the White House press office, a very different kind of battle was unfolding. It started as just another routine morning. Staff shuffled papers, exchanged briefings, and prepped for the day's media engagements. Conversations hummed, controlled, measured, predictable. Then the door slammed open. A junior aide practically tripped into the room, gripping an iPad like it contained classified war plans. His face was pale, his voice tight. "Ma'am, you need to see this right now." Karoline barely lifted her eyes. She had seen enough political ambushes to know one was always coming, but something about the way he stood there. Frozen sent a ripple of unease through the room. She extended her hand for the device. Then she saw it. The screen was alive with The View's broadcast the moment her name was uttered. The studio transformed not into a panel discussion, but an execution chamber. Whoopi Goldberg, perched like a high priestess of media judgment, dropped her line with the precision of a guillotine. The truth is, she's only here for one reason, because Donald Trump thinks she's a 10. The reaction inside The View's studio was instant gasping laughter validation, but inside the White House press room, silence. Then a sharp breath, a senior advisor muttered, voice low and taut, "They're taking you apart." "Live, another staffer already on the phone," whispered urgently into the receiver. Someone else stood glued to their screen, scrolling as the headlines had already begun flooding in. Karoline exhaled slowly, tapping her nails lightly against the desk. Then she spoke, not rushed, not rattled, but deliberate. "Well, that was bold." The room snapped to attention. She turned the iPad, slightly angling it toward her communications director. "They're trying to frame me as Trump's Barbie doll. No credibility. No experience, just a decorative piece in his administration." The advisor's expression was tight. "That narrative's dangerous. It's the kind of thing that sticks." Karoline hummed, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Oh, I know that's why they didn't waste time. On policy critiques, if I was a man, they'd be attacking my decisions, but I'm not. So they're reducing me to looks." A breath of frustration from across the room. A staffer clenched his jaw. "Do we respond? Now we could go to Fox. Start flipping the narrative." Karoline let out a short laugh, shaking her head, and let them turn. This into Karoline Leavitt can't take a joke number. That's exactly what they want. They want me defensive, they want me flailing. She finally tore her eyes from the screen setting. The iPad down with a quiet thud. "Number. We let them keep talking." Confusion flickered in the room. "Ma'am." Karoline leaned back, crossing her arms. "They think they're controlling this narrative. Let them believe that." A little longer. Her voice was cool, unwavering, because the only thing better than fighting back immediately is letting them walk straight into their own downfall. And as The View hosts based in the glow of their orchestrated takedown, Karoline was already setting the stage for something far worse. The air in the White House press office had changed, not just tense, charged electric like the split second before a lightning strike. The murmurs of panic had quieted, replaced by the relentless tapping of keyboards, the rapid flipping between news sites, and the sharp, clipped voices of staff trying and failing to get ahead of a storm that had already been unleashed. But Karoline wasn't watching the chaos. She was watching the pattern. Her communications aide was hunched over a laptop, scrolling with an urgency that suggested he had just stumbled onto something bigger than he was prepared for. Then he froze. His face darkened as he turned the screen toward her. "Look at the timestamps." She leaned in, and that's when she saw it. CNN's hit piece live. 7 minutes into The View's broadcast, MSNBC's scathing analysis uploaded before Whoopi had even finished talking. The Guardian's editorial fully formatted and published before the segment. Could have logically been reviewed. Karoline exhaled through her nose, fingers drumming lightly against the desk. This wasn't a reaction. Her aide swallowed. "Number. It was a launch." The realization settled over the room like a thick fog. This wasn't a media frenzy spiraling out of control. It was controlled from the start. The headlines, the carefully phrased concerns about her confidence, the synchronized narrative. It had all been preloaded, waiting for the moment. The View hit play. Someone had written the ending before the story had even begun. A cold, sharp thought formed in her mind. Who pulled the trigger? Then her phone vibrated against the desk. The display flashed unknown caller. Silence stretched as the screen buzzed again, like a pulse refusing to be ignored. The staff ERS were still talking, still scrambling, still trying to fight fire with a garden hose, but Karoline had already tuned them out. She picked up the phone and answered a voice, low, calculated, familiar in the way a shadow at midnight is familiar. You don't know me, Karoline, but I know you, and I know what they're trying to do. The White House press office had never felt so quiet. Karoline's grip on the phone tightened. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. The voice continued smooth, unhurried. They've been planning this for weeks, and if you don't stop it now, they won't stop at just your reputation. A slow, creeping sense of clarity settled in her chest, the View smear campaign that was just the surface. But what lay beneath that was the real threat. Karoline didn't react immediately. She didn't slam her hands on the desk. She didn't demand airtime, and she certainly didn't scramble for damage control like some desperate politician trying to salvage a sinking career. No. She sat there watching. The View segment fade into its next round of smug self. Congratulation fingers tapping lightly against the desk, one of her aides. His nerves practically vibrating through his chiz suit couldn't hold back. We need to respond now, a statement, a media appearance, at least a tweet. She finally looked up, slow and deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world. No. The aide hesitated, clearly expecting something different. No, we don't react. Her tone was even, measured. We set the stage. The response wasn't what they expected, but they didn't interrupt. They had seen this before. Karoline wasn't reckless. She was calculated. She turned the iPad toward them, letting them take in the pre-written headlines, the synchronized messaging, the way the media had moved in lockstep with the View's attack. This wasn't spontaneous. It was coordinated, which means she let the words hang, letting them fill in the blanks. A senior advisor leaned in, catching on which means there's a trail. Karoline gave a small, satisfied nod. Emails, calls, internal memos. Someone orchestrated this. Another aide, still wired for the traditional PR playbook, cautiously spoke up, and when we find it, Karoline smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reassured people. It was the kind of smile that made people nervous. We don't just fight back. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. We make them wish they'd never started this in the first place. No one needed to be told what that meant. This wasn't going to be a cleanup job. It was going to be a demolition. Karoline leaned back in her chair, eyes flicking between the screen in front of her and the flurry of movement around the press office. The room was still tense, but the energy had shifted, less chaotic, more charged. Everyone knew she was about to make her move. Karoline didn't waste time the moment she had what she needed. She moved like someone who had been expecting this attack long before it arrived. Because she took a slow breath, then unlocked her phone. Scrolling past the endless notifications, she found the contact she needed, a name that carried weight. Not because he was the loudest, but because when he dropped a bombshell, it left craters. Karoline tapped the call button. The line rang once, twice, then a voice sharp and direct cut through. I assume you're not calling to talk about the weather? She smirked slightly. I assume you're not answering just because you enjoy my voice? A low chuckle. You've got something. I've got everything. She tapped her screen, forwarding the files in a clean, secure transfer emails, outlining the pre-coordinated narrative drafts of articles time-stamped before The View even aired, and correspondences that tied the media machine together in a deliberate, methodical attack. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. She could picture him skimming through the documents, his journalist instincts kicking in, connecting the dots as fast as she had. Then finally, his voice returned, low and satisfied. Oh, this is going to burn. Karoline leaned back, pressing the phone tighter against her ear. It has to go live while they're still on air. I want them blindsided. I want them to find out the way I did, by watching their own demise unfold in real time. She could hear the grin in his voice. Consider it done. She hung up. Now she waited. The View was still running its segment. The hosts lounging comfortably in their self-made echo chamber, basking in the warmth of an attack they thought was bulletproof. And then it hit. Her phone vibrated first, then another, Then the entire room seemed to light up as the first trimer of the counterstrike landed, exposed the View smear campaign against Karoline Leavitt leaked. Here's the proof it spread like wildfire. Her laptop screen flashed with breaking news alerts. Twitter ignited, not in reaction to the View's hit job, but in reaction to the receipts proving it had been staged from the start. Screenshots flooded the timeline, placing side by side the exact phrases spoken on. The View and the pre-written headlines that had been uploaded before the segment had even ended. The reactions were instant. So they had the articles ready before she even spoke. Wait, CNN had the piece up while Whoopi was still talking. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. You mean to tell me the same people screeching about misinformation just got caught, manufacturing their own, one after another? People saw the setup for what it was. The View, the networks, the coordinated effort. It was no longer just an opinion. It was undeniable. And inside the View studio, the women who had spent the last hour tearing Karoline apart had no idea that outside their bubble, the world had just turned against them the next morning. The View went live. But this wasn't their show anymore. The carefully curated image they had built over years, the effortless command they once held over their audience, was gone. Whoopi Goldberg sat unnaturally still, her hands clasped together, her face blank in a way that only someone desperately suppressing panic could manage. Joy Bear shifted in her seat, fingers twitching, as if she wanted to adjust her mic anything to have control over something. Anything. Sunny Huston looked at the teleprompter. Then, back at the screen, realizing for the first time that the words in front of her would do nothing to save them. Still, they tried. Whoopi inhaled through her nose, forcing a composed expression. Damage control mode. Now it seems there's been some, controversy about yesterday's show. She started each word dragged out as if she were walking through a minefield, and I just want to say the screen behind them flickered. They didn't know it yet, but the execution had already begun. A direct message from a live viewer flashed across the screen. Unfiltered, uncensored. You claim this show is objective, but here's the proof you staged the entire attack from the beginning. Beginning for a moment, everything stalled. Whoopi's lips parted, but the words, the usual quick-witted response, the practiced media spin, didn't come. Joy Bear blinked as if she had misread what was in front of her, and then the second message appeared, then another, and then an avalanche. So I all just script hit. Pieces. Now, how is this different from election interference? You straight up manufactured a scandal, are you? You going to explain why CNN had their article up before you even aired? Not? The View getting caught, fabricating news like a badly written reality show. Joy turned her mouth opening as if to say something, but what could she possibly say? The audience was no longer nodding along. They were demanding answers. Panic spread across the host faces like a sinking ship taking on water. Then came the real bombshell, a recording. It played across every major conservative news site, at one blasted across social media like a cannonball. The kind of leak that doesn't just cause PR nightmares. It destroys reputations. A production meeting. Their production meeting. Okay? So Karoline's the target. We frame her as inexperienced, unqualified, maybe even a little ditzy. We don't need to get too personal, just enough to plant the idea. Joy, you'll lead. Whoopi, you back her up. The voices were unmistakable. Joy's mouth snapped shut. Whoopi sat frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Sunny Hostin swallowed hard, her practiced smile nowhere to be found. Then came the final dagger screenshots. Flooded the internet, tweets from major media outlets, all posted in perfect sync, proving the entire narrative had been orchestrated from the beginning. They weren't reacting to the View show. They were executing it. And now everyone knew. Expose. The View shot to the top of Twitter. Not just trending, but dominating. ABC's phone lines collapsed under the flood of furious viewers. Executives weren't watching the show anymore. They were locked in closed-door meetings, scrambling to stop the bleeding. But there was no stopping it. And as the View's hosts sat there trapped in a moment they had spent their careers crafting for others, the realization hit them all at once. They weren't the ones controlling the narrative anymore. They were the ones being exposed, and this time there was no script to save them. The fallout was still unfolding when Karoline made her move, while the View's host sat frozen in disbelief, watching their empire implode under the weight of their own deception. Karoline was already writing the next chapter. She didn't need to react impulsively. She owned the moment. Now the phone call from Fox News came almost immediately. They wanted her on air live tonight. Not in some pre-recorded edited segment, but live. She agreed. Before they could finish the sentence a few hours later as the sun dipped below the Washington skyline, Karoline stepped into the Fox studio. The energy inside was different. Not just excitement, but expectation. The kind of buzz that comes when something is about to change the set was pristine. The camera crew working swiftly adjusting angles, preparing for what they already knew would be a ratings-shattering moment. Karoline took her seat across from one of the network's most well-known conservative anchors, unlike the women on The View. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't shifting in her chair. She was ready. The anchor wasted no time. Karoline, you've seen the leaked recordings. You've seen the headlines. You've seen how this all unraveled. What's your response to what The View and the mainstream media attempted to do to you? Karoline didn't hesitate. This isn't just about me, she said, her voice calm, but sharp as a blade. This is about how the media operates, how they control narratives, manufacture scandals, and destroy reputations. Not through facts, but through coordination. The screen behind them lit up. The now infamous recording played again the moment The View's producers were caught strategizing her takedown. The clip cut from their words to the pre-written headlines that had been published before the segment even aired. Karoline let the weight of that moment settle. Then she turned her gaze toward the camera. This is what they do. She continued. They silence voices they don't like. They rig conversations before they even happen. They don't report the news, they decide it. The anchor nodded, leaning forward, but they didn't get away with it this time. Karoline smiled, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was the smile of someone who had just flipped the chessboard. No, they didn't. And then she did something they weren't expecting. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. The camera zoomed in. Starting today, she said, we're making changes at the White House. Changes that put an end to the kind of media control you've just witnessed. The anchor tilted his head. What kind of changes? Karoline didn't look at him. She looked straight into the camera. We're reinstating press credentials for 440 journalists who were stripped of access under the Biden administration. She declared, we're opening the White House press room to independent reporters, not just legacy media, and we implementing new transparency policies to ensure that the American people at the truth, not a pre-approved, pre-coordinated narrative. The words hit like an earthquake. This wasn't just a personal victory. This wasn't just about exposing The View. This was about taking back the press. Social media erupted. In real time, she's not just fighting back. She's flipping the entire system. This is bigger than The View. This is about who gets to decide what's news. Holy hell. She's going after the media's monopoly on information. Back at ABC, panic had set in. Executives sat in a closed-door emergency meeting, fielding calls from furious advertisers. The View was already in free fall, their credibility shattered, but now they weren't just losing the battle. They were watching the war turn against them for decades. They had controlled the narrative. Now the narrative was controlling them, because this wasn't just about one scandal. It was about dismantling their power entirely inside the executive boardroom of ABC. The walls were closing in normally. This was a place of quiet power. Decisions made here shaped what America saw, what it believed, what it talked about. It was where narratives were crafted, tested, and controlled. But now it was a war room, the long conference table once the setting for confident discussions about ratings. Audience manipulation and advertising dollars was now covered in reports that painted a picture of total disaster. Ratings had plummeted. Sponsors were threatening to cut ties. Social media was still relentless, with Expose The View refusing to budge from the top of the trending charts. And worst of all, viewers weren't just angry, they were done. A senior executive, his face flushed with rage, slammed his fist onto the table so hard that coffee cups rattled. How the hell did this happen? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because no one wanted to be the first to say it. Then a voice, calmer but laced with quiet dread, one of the network's longtime strategists, leaned forward, speaking carefully as if he had only just begun to fully grasp the scale of the disaster. We've controlled the public narrative for decades. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head, but now we're losing control there. It was the truth. A few of the executives shifted uncomfortably. They had never had to face this reality before. They had shaped elections, destroyed reputations, buried stories. That didn't fit the agenda they weren't supposed to lose, and yet here they were. A younger executive, clearly uneasy, finally broke the silence. So what do we do? The room went still for the first time in network history. There was no easy answer. The reality they had carefully constructed for years had shattered overnight in the view. It was on the chopping block. The reports in front of them were clear. The show had been hemorrhaging credibility for years, propped up only by corporate allies. And legacy media protections now with the scandal fully exposed. Even those lifelines were starting to pull away for the first time. The network was seriously considering pulling the plug. One of the executives hesitated before speaking. "We cut the show now, and maybe we salvage the brand." The words felt unreal. The View, a cornerstone of daytime television, a tool that had shaped the perception of millions, was suddenly expendable. And if the show was sinking, so were its hosts. Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Huston. The women who had once spoken with absolute certainty, with the assurance that their words carried no consequences. Now they were the story. The same media machine that had once protected them was circling like vultures' articles. "We're already being drafted should The View be canceled." The hosts of The View, under fire for media deception sponsors, weren't just concerned about the show. They were concerned about the faces attached to it. Would they keep their jobs? That was no longer up to them, and for the first time they knew what it felt like to be on the other side of a media takedown, because now they were the ones being taken down. Karoline strode through the grand hallway of the White House, her heels clicking. Against the marble floor, she had walked these halls before, but never like this. Today she wasn't just a press secretary. She was a force that had shattered an empire beyond the heavy doors ahead. The White House press room awaited inside reporters, sat poised with their notepads, cameras rolling, microphones ready. But the energy was different. They weren't just waiting for a briefing. They were waiting for a reckoning. A senior advisor walked beside her, speaking just low enough that only she could hear. "You won this round." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something that hinted at the battles yet to come. "But don't be fooled, they won't go down without a fight." Karoline gave a small nod, but she didn't slow her pace. She knew that already The View had crumbled, but the machine that had built it, the system that had propped up these media institutions, controlling narratives, burying dissent, fabricating scandals, that system was still alive, and it wasn't about to surrender. She reached the doors, took a breath. Then with a push, she stepped inside. The room erupted in flashes as cameras clicked in rapid succession. The press, once so eager to paint her as a political prop, now sat on the edge of their seats. Because she had proven she wasn't just part of the story, she was shaping it. Karoline moved to the podium, gripping its edges with steady hands. She didn't need to rush. The silence in the room spoke for itself. She turned her back to the flashing cameras facing the White House seal that loomed behind her. She wasn't here to play defense anymore. She was here to set the terms for the next war. The screen faded to black. Then a single question appeared. Will the old media regain control? Or is this the dawn of a new era?